The following geographical inquiry will explore the concept of biodiversity and its importance to life on Earth. Accordingly, the unit will involve students investigating local environments and studying the relationship between such places and their inhabitants. Further, it will highlight the need for environments for the survival of all living organisms. Ultimately, the aim of the sequence is to strengthen students' moral judgment in an effort to protect and conserve biodiversity in the schoolyard and beyond. A key inquiry question has been developed and will be introduced to students to guide their learning and provoke curiosity. Thus, the question being, why does biodiversity matter to us? Prior to responding to the inquiry question, it is important to ensure students understand what it is asking. A critical term within the sentence is biodiversity, so students must become familiar with its meaning in order to successfully answer the question. This firstly requires the teacher to elicit students' prior knowledge by asking questions such as, is there anything you already know about the term biodiversity? In addition, the teacher will then relay their own understanding of the term and show students how it can be better understood and remembered by its etymology. Prior to responding, Activity 1 will begin with students watching a YouTube video, which further describes biodiversity and its significance to all living things. Afterwards, students will be given the opportunity to reflect on their newfound knowledge in small, intimate groups of 3. Each group will receive a white sheet of butcher's paper and some coloured textures. Collectively, in their groups, students will be encouraged to draw a mind map depicting their understanding of what biodiversity means in their own words and suggesting some reasons as to why it's important, making direct connections to the video. Furthermore, to account for the student with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, they are provided the option to view the video on an iPad using earphones to gain control of the screen brightness and noise level. As well, they are able to sit outside of the classroom with their chosen group and/or teacher aid to minimize auditory sensitivity and increase focus. This student may respond to the task by typing on the iPad or alternatively having the teacher as a scribe following discussion. Accommodating to the needs of the student with gifts and talents would include giving them a chance to work independently on a mind map, perhaps encouraging them to create a digital one on the iPad. 2, they are assigned a task to research other reasons why biodiversity is important. In Activity 2, students are asked the question, how biodiverse are we? And after having a brief discussion involving the biodiversity of the local area, students embark on a trip into their schoolyard. In pairs, using an iPad, students are given the task of taking a photo of a biodiverse area and a photo of a non-biodiverse area. Once students return to the classroom, they are to upload their photos onto a new Word document and write a justification to suggest why photo 1 is an example of biodiversity and why photo 2 is not an example of biodiversity. In their pairs, students are to turn to another pair and present their ideas in their Word document. In Activity 2, the student with ASD is again given the option of working in a pair of their choice and/or with the teacher aid. As well, they can either complete their justification on the iPad themselves or verbally with the help of a scribe. Moreover, the student with gifts and talent may choose to work independently. Additionally, they will be challenged to take 2 photos of a biodiverse area and 2 photos of a non-biodiverse area. Instead of writing the justifications on a Word document, they will present them on the spot to the remainder of the class. Here is an example of a possible biodiverse area and a non-biodiverse area in the schoolyard. You can see that the biodiverse image contains more trees, shrubs, and grass compared to the non-biodiverse image, which lacks greenery and wildlife. Activity 3 begins with the teacher asking students the question, what examples of biodiversity can be found and how can this be measured? Students are introduced to tally charts and their purpose and are shown how they can be accurately used to measure biodiversity. Afterwards, students partake on another trip outside of the classroom, though this time along the school's special nature trail. Each student will receive their own tally chart to complete whilst on their outing. The worksheet includes two columns, the left column where the animal or plant is to be noted, and the right column suggesting the amount of animals or plants that were noticed. To cater to the needs of the student with ASD, the teacher places them with a partner or welcomes the assistance of a teacher aide. The student with gifts and talent is encouraged to identify and note down at least 7 different species. 3 happen to be plants. Once students have returned from their trip to the nature trail, the second part of activity 3 involves representing the data in the form of the pictograph. Students will complete this independently as they are already familiar with pictographs from previous geography and mathematics lessons. Once students have finished their pictographs, they are required to analyse the data and describe what they see in 1 or 2 sentences. However, before doing so, the teacher will teach students how to analyse the data presented using their own finished pictograph as a reference. And collectively as a class, students will answer some guiding questions, such as, what do you notice from looking at this pictograph? And what does each image or symbol in this pictograph represent? In activity 4, the teacher will introduce students to a YouTube video demonstrating how to complete a sketch drawing and mentioning the important details to include, like the main features, the background, middle ground, and foreground. Students will then independently complete their own sketch drawing of one of their photographs taken from activity 2. This could either be a plant or an animal. Whilst doing so, the teacher will complete their own of an Australian native bottle brush on the whiteboard for everyone to see. They will also demonstrate the appropriate inclusion of a date, title, location, and annotations. The second half of activity 4 will consist of the teacher informing students about the planned trip to Roma Street Parklands. The trip will include a guest park ranger who will come to speak to students about the biodiversity of the place and ways to improve biodiversity at school. Students will be assigned the task of selecting the most suitable plant from the parkland to place also into the schoolyard. Therefore, activity 4 will conclude with the students writing down 3 questions they may ask the ranger next week to help them with their plant selection. A question could be, is there a plant that grows best in the shade? Or what plants attract the most animals? The pre-field work activities provide students the opportunity to practice skills essential for successful participation in field work and post-field work. Students must know how to use a tally sheet, create a field sketch, and analyse data information.
The main geographical concept that this field trip covers is place. Place refers to a position, site, or the nature of the place. Therefore, through varied experiences and depths of knowledge, place begins to have a special and deep meaning towards children. Therefore, through this field trip, the students are investigating the place of the Roma Street Parklands and the necessity to preserve the biodiversity of flora and fauna there. Through the data collected of the man-made, controlled, and natural features of the park, as well as the Q&A session, students will gain an understanding of the importance culturally and environmentally that the Roma Street Parklands have in Brisbane. Students will then bring this knowledge and data back into their classroom to characterise and build their own biodiverse garden. This unique experience will create a profound relationship between the students and that place of school and learning.
Our Year 4 students will be going on, we'll continue with the theme of biodiversity and use the skills covered in the pre-field work, such as tallying and completing a plant sketch. The field trip will last for about an hour and a half, during which time students will have the opportunity to explore the biodiversity that is maintained at the gardens at the parklands. We chose Roma Street Parklands because of its close proximity to the school, to minimise travel time, and to give our students the opportunity to gain insight from an industry expert. While on site, the students will also have the chance to explore native and introduced plant species, man-made, natural and controlled features, and the number of staff required to maintain the area. The field trip mostly includes the observation of the rainforest, forest and dry or arid areas of the parklands by exploring more than one type of environment. In doing so, we're hoping that our students will be able to see how biodiversity does not always look the same for one place as it does another. The data that the students gather will later be graphed and analysed in the post-fieldwork activities and should provide students with an insight into what is required to maintain biodiversity in areas such as the parklands. By gathering data on specific features of the area, students will then have the evidence and understanding that will assist them in making judgments about ecosystems-based management.
Let me take you down to a trip of the Roma Street parklands. Firstly, the students will arrive at the bus drop-off zone. We have scheduled this trip for a morning session to reduce the amount of public. However, please, when moving through the bus stop, be mindful of the public and safety while crossing one area of the road. This area is a low traffic area, but please be mindful. The class group will then proceed to walk up the escalators to the information hub in the parklands, as seen on checkpoint 1 on your maps. At the information hub, conduct the first head count and go over expectations of looking after the environment, behaviour, and that water bubblers are placed around the parklands. Finally, also talk about the worksheet. The worksheet includes a tallying of maintenance people, 3 different features, the man-made, controlled, and natural. Please specify to the children that they should list what they see as well. The flip side of the worksheet also includes an area for their 3 questions which they have completed in the pre-field work, and an area to complete their plant sketch. Make sure that students know that they will be continuously collecting the qualitative data, but will have time to stop for the plant sketch and the Q&A session. As seen in the first video, a vine with another indication is shown. This plant begins the unremarkable seasonal plants trail held throughout the Roma Street parklands. Through this field trip, we will be following the majority of this trail. Each number represents a different plant that corresponds to more information on the map. While walking, here is where the teacher will read the blurb of that plant. This will give students a good idea of what plants they want to include in their design gardens back at the school. In the second video, it presents a snippet for a visual walkthrough to Fig Tree Avenue, which is the second checkpoint in this field trip. Even in this video, there are multiple man-made, natural, and managed features that can be seen. Encourage the students to tally these and write a description of what they are, as seen in the photo. As seen in the first video, a vine with another indication is shown. This plant begins the unremarkable seasonal plants trail held throughout the Roma Street parklands. Through this field trip, we will be following the majority of this trail. Each number represents a different plant that corresponds to more information on the map. While walking, here is where the teacher will read the blurb of that plant. This will give students a good idea of what plants they want to include in their design gardens back at the school. In the second video, it presents a snippet for a visual walkthrough to Fig Tree Avenue, which is the second checkpoint in this field trip. Even in this video, there are multiple man-made, natural, and managed features that can be seen. Encourage the students to tally these and write a description of what they are, as seen in the photo. Students will then be directed to continue the pathway down to the celebration lawn. They will then have 30 minutes for a morning tea/lunch break. Toilets and water bubblers are nearby, and they will stay here on the lawn for the Q&A session with the Roma Street Parkland expert. This is where they'll ask their 3 questions that they designed in the pre-field work. These should also include some of the inquiry questions that we have mentioned above. After the Q&A is finished, it is time to head back to the bus. The bus pickup zone is in the same area as the drop-off zone. In total, this field trip will take around an hour and a half out of the day. Once reaching the opening of the rainforest walk, perform a head count and then continue through to the rainforest walk. Invite students with ASD to use their headphones to block out the sound if it is too much. The rainforest area of the Roma Street Parklands is important to talk about in relation to place because it shows how natural biodiversity will change throughout different climate areas. Teachers should talk about how the area is heavily managed with the sprinklers and misting system and waterways to help create a natural environment. Make sure students are continually adding to that tallying and describing the natural and man-made and managed features that they can see. Make notes on their artwork as a form of culture in the gardens. A head count will also be completed at the end of the rainforest walk at the mosaic map or the lookout on your maps. As stated above, students will complete the collection of qualitative data continuously throughout their walk of the Roma Street Parklands. This includes collecting evidence on the amount of maintenance people see to answer the inquiry question, who is involved in preserving the biodiversity at the Roma Street Parklands? They will then collect the quantitative data and answers to their prepared questions at the Q&A session with the Roma Street expert. Students will then be given time in their post-field work to go over the data collected and to finish their plan sketch if not completed at the park.
The resource that will be used during the field trip is the graphic organizer that you can see on the slide here. As we've shown, it includes space for the questions that students devised in their pre-field work activities, as well as space for the tally marks for the features of the park and the maintenance workers. There is also an area at the bottom of the second side of the organizer for students to complete their plant sketch. This type of quantitative data collected is appropriate for a Year 4 class as they've already got experience with tallying from previous years, meaning that they can build on this knowledge by using the data collected during the fieldwork to create a variety of data displays, such as pie charts or bar graphs, which is a content goal within the Year 4 statistics and probability strand of the curriculum. Area here, where questions that students will ask the Parklands expert are listed, will be useful to them for two reasons. The first is that it will give students valuable knowledge that they will need when creating their school garden plan for action, so it is directly related to the knowledge required to complete their post-fieldwork presentation. The second reason that the question and answer session is important is that it will help students understand that there are many roles involved in maintaining the parklands. For example, the maintenance workers, the landscapers and planners, and council officials. This develops the understanding that a place has more than one purpose, and that while extremely important, biodiversity is just one of these purposes. Not only this, but it should begin to get students thinking about the resources that are required to create and maintain such an area and the finite nature of these resources. Through this learning, that students can begin to look at the issue at hand by building on their current understanding of place and space and considering the interconnections of a place and its inhabitants that determine its significance and purpose. When we relate this back to the education for sustainability models, such as the one that you see on this slide, we can see that focusing on this data will enable students to approach sustainability as a complex, multifaceted issue that requires considerations of economic, social, and environmental viability. Therefore, by engaging in these activities, students are being given the opportunity to learn through inquiry about the principles and underpinnings of ecosystem-based management, while having the freedom to use the information gathered to make their own decisions about the issue. It's through this that students are consistently developing their environmental worldview, a value that is reflected in the rationale for HASS in the curriculum, which emphasizes the importance of students developing skills and understandings that empower them to actively shape their own lives and futures. While the pre-fieldwork and fieldwork activities mostly prepare students with the information they need to make these judgments, the post-fieldwork activities themselves actively involve students evaluating and synthesizing this information.
After students return from their field trip, they are to delve into the post-fieldwork learning. The main task involves students reflecting on the notes and qualitative and quantitative data gathered during their field trip and use this information to formulate a plan for action. This plan for action involves analysing and reflecting on the importance of biodiversity in the Roma Street Parklands and applying this knowledge to the school grounds. Specifically, students should understand how and why biodiversity is important and what actions should be taken to improve the school's natural environment. Specifically, which plant will be chosen to add to the school grounds and why. The guiding inquiry questions for the first post-field work activity include: who should we speak with to enact changes to our school's biodiversity, and what action should we take and why? Students will firstly reflect on their field trip and will analyse the collected data from the Roma Street parklands in order to identify any trends. This data specifically entails the tallies of the maintenance staff and the number of man-made, controlled and natural features in the park. A comparison to the data surrounding the school's biodiversity will be made to allow students to evaluate their plant choice of what plant from the parklands will be grown at school. Specifically, students will evaluate how their plant of choice contributes to the biodiversity of the parklands and whether this plant is suitable to grow at the school and justify the reasons as to why. Having analysed the data regarding the number of maintenance staff observed allows students to roughly gauge how often the parklands are tended to, and as a result, the maintenance requirements of their own plant choice for the school's garden. Analysing the data about man-made, natural and controlled features of the park gives students an insight into how these factors can all work together to create a functioning biodiverse environment in built-up areas. This gives students a chance to reflect on how their proposal may exist and function in the school's environment. After being briefed on the requirements of the project, students begin their plan for action. The students' plant sketches, as well as the Q&A results from the field trip, will be pinned on the wall for all to see, and students will finalise their plant choice after looking at these. From here, students will begin the introduction to their proposal, during which the teacher will provide ongoing verbal feedback. The completion of this introduction will serve as the formative assessment of this activity. Further, to differentiate this aspect of the activity for the diverse learners in the class, the student with ASD will be provided the option to produce a recorded verbal response rather than written. For the gifted and talented students, they may decide to address their written proposal to the local council in the form of a formal letter consisting of 1 to 2 paragraphs rather than the short response required by the other students. To conclude the activity, a thumbs up or down question related to the progress of the students' proposals will be asked. They will also be required to reflect on their progress by answering the questions of whether they have considered how their chosen plant or plants will contribute to the school's biodiversity. The next activity follows on from the last, where students will continue preparing their proposals for action. The guiding inquiry questions for the activity include: what type of biodiversity improvement action has been planned, and how will my planning decisions contribute to the biodiversity of the area? Firstly, students will review mapping skills, specifically bolts. The teacher will place a map of the school on the board with features missing, and as a class, students are to identify and correct the mistakes made. Having had this recap on mapping, they should be confident enough to map their proposed garden. To do this, students are provided an A3 copy of the proposed area where their plant is to be planted, the copy already including the source and scale. Next, students are to write a justification of their plant choice and the design of their garden. The map and the written components contribute to the formative assessment of this activity. To differentiate the activity for diverse learners, firstly, the gifted and talented students are to use an image from Google Earth to plan and map their proposed garden. They are to navigate the program to determine the scale and orientation of their map, which incorporates ICT aspects into their learning. The final post-field work activity involves a panel discussion with, for example, the school principal or a local First Nations elder, which provides students with feedback and considerations on their plans. As well as this, students write a reflection addressing possible changes to their proposal in relation to the provided feedback. By this stage, students will have gained an array of practical and educational skills that can be translated into everyday life and future learning. As well as this, the needs of the Australian curriculum have been met in an engaging and hands-on manner. The students will exit this learning experience understanding the importance of the environment and biodiversity with an additional understanding of their own potential to initiate change, overall leading our students to an environmentally observant and conscious future.